give a quick intro. Right, and we'll be recording, and I'll have to add that. So I hope everybody's okay with that. So I'll invite Nikki and Andrew to just give a quick introduction about Rapid Transition Alliance and how it features into this conversation of prosumerism.
Thanks, Joel. I'll go first, and I think Nikki will say a little bit extra as well. And so I'm sitting here in South London where the sun is shining. We're enjoying strange and unusual weather like everywhere else in the world at the moment, lots of extremes. And we set up the Rapid Transition Alliance quite not long ago, a couple of years ago, to try and overcome the problem that making changes to meet the speed and scale of change that's implied by climate science to prevent runaway climate change and the climate and ecological emergency was very difficult because people found it very hard to imagine circumstances in which change like that could happen. So we set out with a mission of gathering what we called evidence-based hope, looking at examples from history, from all around the world and from today, which demonstrate our ability to achieve change at that speed and scale. And it wasn't just about our use of fossil fuels. It was about the fact that the ecological and climate crisis is being driven at a global aggregate scale by huge overconsumption. And one of the ways in which we can see this is that using ecological footprint accounting, we can see that at the end of July, the world started consuming more and producing more waste than the biosphere can absorb and regenerate. And that creates huge problems because it means we're stressing our life-supporting ecosystems, and barely a day goes past at the moment without us seeing the kind of increasingly extreme weather which is leaving people homeless and worse and creating all kinds of problems. Even with the Olympics going on at the moment, it's the chaos in the running order because of extreme weather. But the other thing that we know, and this is a very unequal problem globally, and that the levels of overconsumption are taking place in quite clear social and demographic groups and quite clear parts of the world. The irony of this is that all the research tells us that once you get above a certain level of consumption, which gives you the basic stuff that you need for life, that consuming more and more doesn't improve your well-being. So we did studies at the New Economics Foundation many years ago showing that if you were hugely over-consuming at so-called 8-planet living, your chances of life satisfaction were no greater than if you were consuming down at about 1-planet living. And there's an awful amount, a large amount of waste that goes into that. And we also know that if just the richest 10% of the world reduce their consumption, their emissions to the average European Union level, it's not a great deal of hardship involved in that at all, that it would cut global emissions by 30%. So what we're interested in, I suppose, is how we can change the architecture of the choices within which we decide how we live, the kind of role models out there that say, give you ideas about how to live, and how we can tackle the issue right at the top end of overconsumption so that we can create opportunities for dealing with also the global crisis of poverty and inequality, so that you can increase consumption where people are under-consuming by creating the environmental space to do that. And the Rapid Transition Alliance is a way of looking at practical, real lived examples that show us how that can come about. I'll leave it there, and maybe Nikki will want to just add one or two things.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I wanted to just add a couple of things, actually, to say that although we are a think tank, we're a bit more of an action tank. We really like to see things that are being done and have been done. And although we're very interested always in future ideas and possibilities, we want to see those in the light of what works, rather than concentrating on dreams and hopes alone. Hence what Andrew said about the phrase evidence-based hope being so important. We're interested in things that are replicable, so things we can easily replicate in other places, even if they need to be adapted to other situations, and that are preferably scalable. So something that may be done in a small sense somewhere else, could we do that across a whole country or a whole region, for example, or across a whole industry? And we're very interested in stories that affect our emotions as well, things that inspire us and actually encourage us to take action, both personally and in our business and work lives, wherever we participate. From my own role within the network, we are a network of members of about 150 at the moment and growing all the time, of NGOs, from academic organisations to activist groups and everything in between. And we're looking specifically for members in Africa to bring the perspective that you have from your own countries and possibly from the wider region, or maybe from your experience in other regions too. Today we're here predominantly to listen and learn. We're interested in cross-fertilization between academia and activism and how we reflect those images and encourage action through the use of media. So we're interested in putting out as much as we can into the public domain and making it transparent. And I'm looking forward very much to hearing from the rest of you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Nikki, for starting us off in that introduction of basically Rapid Transition Alliance and some of the areas of focus and why it becomes important for us to start having this reflection. So basically, the other partner in this is Africa Sustainability Hub, and within the Africa Sustainability Hub, ideally, and resonating with what the Rapid Transition Alliance does is in terms of using evidence for, policy making and for advisories. And this is anchored within what you're also doing at Africa Center of Technology Studies in terms of how do we use this knowledge to better the livelihoods of different stakeholders and people in the global south in many ways. And this is how the Africa Research and Impact Network comes into play, because then we are now looking at ways of fostering connections and moving forward these conversations in a way that it attracts direct action, and it stops just being, a talk show, but it starts being an action kind of space and creating impact. And it's in light with this conversation that today we were talking about, prosumerism. And when we started having this and we were talking to different stakeholders, it emerged that, some point the question was, what is prosumption? What is prosumerism? And ideally, a prosumer is someone who, in one sense, they're producing the same thing that adds value in their life, but also can also be value that they're getting incentives with. And they're also consuming the same. So it's basically something that you're able to produce and consume. At a household level, this could be something as easy as, renewable energy being integrated into main national grids, for example. But at a national level, at a macro level, then prosumerism starts playing into place of export-import space. And when you start thinking about export-import, of course, you're thinking, is the same value of export similar to what is consumed locally, or is the value of what is consumed locally lower? In some sense, this is pushed as not a priority. And we'll hear from our panelists and some of the provocative statements that emerge from different conversations on how this has been and how this can be looked into. Then when we talk about prosumerism, we're also talking about agency. Are we able to actually act in the sense that we'll be moving towards what we want in terms of sustainability? When you're looking at this capacity to act in terms of the economics, the socio-political processes, or even the biophysical environment, are we able to affect how it translates into the next step of sustainability? So when you start thinking about prosumer agency, then we're in this space we are thinking about how do we make the best of the space between consumption and production? How do we balance that in the sense that we can act to give us a positive response, or it can act to take us, make it worse in some sense? Because as the population in Africa grows, you start realizing that we start having different priorities, and we start also thinking about, eighth planet living, for example, as Andrew has mentioned, and relevance to one planet living. It's in this space that we're saying now, what is the prosumer agency in Africa? What is it that, and ideally for the global south, what is it that we should do or could do to make consumption to make sense and to be able to be sustainable. This is the anchor of the conversation today. And to get us into the middle of the conversation, we had two provocations. So basically two statements. One was from Andrew Sims, and the other one was from Ronald Dianga, both of whom are in this space of consumer production. So first, I'll just take about a minute and a half to play what Ronald's reflections were, and then we'll come to what Andrew's reflections were. So I hope you'll be able to hear this. Yeah.
Joel, I don't think it's clear. I don't know if it's me or.
Sorry, everybody. I think there is a technical problem with this, but Salome has posted the provocation in the chat, so I think we can also follow it there. So that's the first one, and then we have the second one from Andrew Sims. I think we'll also post that in the chat so that you can also follow it. So maybe I'll give it just a moment for people to listen through so that we are at the same space. In the meantime, as you listen to the provocation, I'm wondering what comes to mind. What are the bits of the conversation that emerges to as key areas that you resonate with? I mean, you can also type it in the chat if there's something that is really emerging as interesting from the provocation, or the questions that emerge from what the two provocateurs are able to share. You can drop it in the chat, and then you can use that to open the conversation in our next discussion. All right, I think we have listened a bit of this, and so that we are not so quiet, I think we'll continue with our program. And the next bit of this, even as you share your thoughts about the provocation from the videos, is we want to invite some panelists to also share the experiences in different perspectives, and also to basically bring us to board in experience on one side, but also practice on the other. If you have any questions related to the provocation, both of the provocateurs are with us in the house, so we can raise those with them and try to have a discussion around that. But in the panel session, which is going to be really the fundamental bit of our discussion, is we are going to explore 3 questions, and these 3 questions will involve 4 panelists. So you've heard from Nikki Sonta, we'll hear from Peninah Ndegwa, Agnes Lutomia, and Ronald Dianga. And I'll just call upon, for example, that we start with Nikki in your reflection of these 3 question areas. So as you start, perhaps you could just again introduce yourself for those people who didn't have introduction in the beginning, and just give us your reflection on, how you consider the whole idea of agency and prosumerism. What type does resonate most with your work, and if there are any kind of drivers that will lead us to sustainable prosumerism, and the kind of outcomes that you'd like to see moving into this. Nikki.
Yeah, hello, thanks, Joel. Nikki Sonta here from Rapid Transition Alliance. I've only received these questions just this morning, so probably like some of you, I've got loads of thoughts in my mind, and conscious also that I'm reflecting very much from outside, not with a huge amount of expertise in Africa, particularly, other than individual case studies that we've looked at. Joel, would you do me a favour and put those questions back on the screen? Is that possible? Or just put them in the chat or something? Just so I can thank you, that's really helpful. So the type of agency shared among stakeholders. I think what's interesting, one reflection about agency is that generally, globally, I think even whatever level you're at within this debate about how do we react positively to climate change and try and look at our consumption wherever that is honestly and take action on it. Most people feel that they don't have very much agency, that the issue is enormous, it's very complex, and so there's a lot of fear around and a lot of finger pointing at perhaps other people or other organizations should be changing their behavior. And so I think sometimes it's interesting to consider it both from an individual personal point of view and also from a more systemic point of view. How do we in our own lives consume and expect consumption to happen in our society, and what do we expect of other people? Sometimes it's easy to talk about these things, and it's very hard to actually do them. That's speaking very much from a perspective from the global north, where we have way too much stuff, and even people who consider that they are probably consuming at quite a low thoughtful level are already consuming at a level of multiple earths, simply by existing in the kind of society that we already have. Some of the drivers I just thought about. Obviously, for me, the obvious driver is climate change. It's sitting all around us. It's very much here. The issues that worry us all will be things to do with resources, natural resources, flooding, water use, food production. Those sorts of things are very much are drivers that will affect how industries produce product, and also how people consume them in the future, and already now too. I'm very interested in the role of business in this, and I found the provocation very interesting from that area. In some areas, businesses seem to be and is the big bad wolf, with a lot of money and power and therefore a lot of agency. And in other ways, businesses can be choose to be very much at the lead and in the vanguard and making changes because they have access to fast decision-making processes. And also they have access to finance in a way that policymakers don't often have that sort of speed of change at hand for them. I'm also interested in age and youth. We've done a few case studies on the youth of the world and how they are reacting and responding to this and taking agency into their own hands, even though they sometimes don't even have it legally. They don't care, they just get out there and do stuff, and trying to tell adults, the adult world, how to behave better, and taking it into their own hands to consume differently. So in the global north, that's about, for instance, the big move towards veganism, choosing not to eat, only to eat a plant-based diet. That's quite interesting to me. Also technology, and I know fully that changing technologies is very difficult, and in places where technology is embedded and infrastructure is old, such as we face in the global north, in my own country of the UK, trying to make our homes more sustainable is very difficult. We live in houses that sometimes hundreds of years old, with very antiquated systems and hard to change. We have covered examples at the Rapid Transition Alliance, for instance, of mobile money from Africa, which have been good examples to show how technology can enable people to leap a technology. So a lot of African people won't have had a landline in their home, and they will never have a landline in their home because they don't now need it in the world of mobile technology. Outcomes are very hard to say, especially because I'm speaking first before all of you much more knowledgeable people are speaking. I think my first thing that came to my mind was, how can we avoid, is it possible that Africa, looking at this very unusual situation of moving from producer to consumer thoughtfully and with great wisdom, could avoid a lot of mistakes that have been made elsewhere in the world? I also think there's something about the African environment is obviously it's a huge continent with an enormous variety of countries and different sorts of environments. But I think Africa as a region has a much better and closer knowledge and understanding of what it's like living with the practical realities of climate change and also with production. And a lot of people in the global north have lost that contact, to be honest. So we are actually looking to learn very much again from people who are right in the thick of it. And I'm interested in, I've got a couple of questions I'm just thinking about. I'd like to know more about what the mainstream views on sustainability are in your own countries and your own regions. And I'm very interested to think about what is the role of finance in this, both finance from inside your countries and finance from global bodies, knowing how much that's already influenced Africa in the past, for good and for ill. I don't know if that's of use, but those are some reflections.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki, for that. I'm just trying to find, an nexus to bridge this to Agnes, because Agnes has also been working quite with different science granting councils and the whole space around evidence for action, if I could call it. Agnes, do you think that we have agency to build, a prosumer, some kind of movement, if I could call it, in a way that could lead us to sustainability in the end? And, just speaking from Nikki, do we have financial mechanisms within, nationally that can support this? Agnes, if you're on the call, please.
Hi, everyone. My apologies. I had another meeting just before this, so I wasn't able to join in time. But let me take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Agnes Lutomia. I'm a research fellow at the African Center for Technology Studies. Currently, I support the Science Granting Council's initiative. And I have a background in economics. So when I think I've never paid much attention of what happens when a producer becomes a consumer until I saw the topic for this particular webinar. But again, moving quickly on the point of discussion of today, and my brief background when it comes to science, technology, studies, and innovation at large, maybe I will quickly share my thoughts And I'll be very particular on what I want to speak on. I will just quickly speak on number 2, the drivers towards sustainable prosumerism, and mention a bit of the potential outcomes that we would like to see. And maybe that, I hope that I will be able to answer your question, and Joel, of if we have agency. But I mean, I would be speaking more or less with the knowledge in mind when it comes to the producers of knowledge or innovators who have to work with technology or produce technology that they still have to consume. Like I said, looking at this particular topic, and what I thought quickly was, and just from perusing through literature or on the studies that have been done, whether the systematic reviews that have been done or the scientometric analysis that have been done on this particular research or prosumer research. So I just got 3 drivers and things that we can be able to discuss at large. And of course, Nikki mentioned it to some extent, and that has to do with the need for climate change, or the need to decarbonize, especially if you have to talk about the energy system. And then that's a point when we start talking about the technology aspects that can enable us to decarbonize, or to be able to work with the renewable energy, for instance. And then, of course, from an economical point of view, really, the driver would be for effectiveness and efficiency. The need to cut on costs, because of course, when you talk about someone being able to produce and consume, be it energy, be it knowledge, from my own background, then you have to start talking about the cost cutting aspects. Then there is there's a need of, you have to have a functioning for production and consumption to happen within any, be it within the energy system, or be it within the knowledge system or the technological system. You have to start talking about a flexible system. So to me, that will also be one of the drivers. But there are other aspects that I'm very keen on talking about, and that will maybe be able to some extent answer the question that Joel is asking. Do we have enabling environments? Because for the drivers to work, the 3 drivers that I've just mentioned, for them to be able to work, or for them to be able to give you a system that will work, you will need an enabling environment. And you mentioned the aspect of finances. So certainly we need financial systems in place, but then again, you have to talk about, there is no way you're going to talk about finances when you talk about the energy sector or the energy system, for instance. You also need to think about the markets. So you have to ask yourself one question: do we have effective and efficient markets in place? I mean, if you're talking from an economic angle, do we have efficient and effective design markets and regulations that can actually be able to incentivize the uptake, for instance, of technologies? Because for this driver that I mentioned, you might need an enabling environment, and this might include new technologies. However, for this to be able to work, you need to have an efficient market. Do we have that in place? And one other thing you have to start asking yourselves or ourselves is that, do we have the political and regulatory environment that is very conducive for this to happen, for a prosumer agency to be able, for us to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of, and that will bring me to the outcome aspect later on. So are the political and regulatory issues relating to the market designs that I would just mentioned in place? So that's one particular aspect that I am very, very keen. And I think I'm just repeating this for emphasis purposes, but then you have to still ask the question, do we have adequate markets? That's something that we have to ask ourselves. That brings us to the tariffs. And I think this is just from my own economic background? Do we have the tariffs and regulatory regimes in place to incentivize prosumerism? That's the kind of questions we have to ask ourselves. There is something that is very important, and that has to do with the information that has to be availed to the producers or the consumers. And so the question we have to ask ourselves, do we have adequate information out there? Is there adequate research happening? Because for prosumerism to happen, or even for the consumption and production of knowledge, for instance, of technologies, of innovations to happen, you would more or less need a whole lot of input into the research and development. Do we have a whole lot of that happening? So that has to be the question that we have to ask ourselves. And maybe to finish, I have to ask a question of, do we have adequate business models to enable, and that has to be, it depends with the angle you're looking at, really. I'm looking at it from a technological and economic angle that I'm asking. Would you, for prosumerism to happen, do we have adequate business models within the African context, for instance, that will allow financial investments and then allow new and technological production, for instance, and uptake, for instance, to happen? Do we have that in place? So I think through this, through the many questions that I'm asking, but I hope that they are able to answer your question from a knowledge angle and from a technological innovation uptake angle. Joel.
Thanks, Agnes, for those insights. I mean, it really is like, this is a story, because Nikki raises the question of reflexivity. We have to be able to reflect within ourselves, you know, how far we want this to go. And Agnes, you're bringing in very interesting points about there are certain requirements infrastructurally in terms of, psychologically within ourselves that we also need to reflect on. We need to think about the systems we have. Do we have systems in place that can actually accommodate prosumerism? I mean, these are very interesting questions, and I think some questions also coming in the chat. I wanted to bring Ronald Dianga here. I mean, Ronald, you have been in this space in actual numbers, the statistics of it, working with different players in this space. What is your take on this agency, as it were? And please introduce yourself as you start.
Thank you very much, Joel. I appreciate all of us on call for this very important discussion that we're having today. So my name is Ronald Dianga. I work at Kenarava Group Limited. Kenarava is an agribusiness advisory company, and we basically work to solve the challenges or provide solutions to food and environmental challenges. This topic is very interesting, and I think discussions that have preceded before have, provoked a lot of thoughts also around my head and just in my head as I try to, also give a few reflections that I've been thinking about in the course of the conversations that have been going. But I want to also say that I think the speakers that have gone before me have also read my mind, because let me first begin with something that they both spoke about, and that is climate change. Really, climate change, is the biggest risk multiplier, and it poses a lot of challenges and influences a lot on both the production and consuming patterns that we have. And therefore, it's important, and in an attempt as I make this presentation, just to answer all the three questions that Joel, you have asked. And for me, actually, from where I sit and where I look at climate change, I believe that consumer proactiveness and co-creation is very important in informing the production patterns, because if we really have to mitigate and build the resilience and give room for that conducive environment for prosumerism to take place, we must ensure that the consumer proactiveness comes out very clearly, so that then their role is key in trying to support or trying to be able to to add value into this whole entire process. Therefore, I believe that consumer awareness, and is for prosumerism to happen, both the producer and consumer must be empowered with knowledge, and they must know that for this to, to be sustainable, both of these actors must be very, very well versed with this particular area. And I believe that this will allow and give that conducive room also for prosumerism to take place. The other thing that I wanted to mention about is the millennial economy, where I think most of the population falls. See, the millennial economy are very interesting, and these are the youth and young people of this continent. And what they are saying, and what I also belong in that bracket, and what we are saying is that do not make resolutions for us without us. So really, they are taking the responsibility, and we are taking the responsibility amongst us, that with the trends that we are seeing around the continent, we literally are taking the responsibility for our future. And therefore, we also want to put our voice, we want to crowd our voices into the process of prosumerism, so that then at the end of the day, we can also take responsibility and be able to support the future of this particular agency. So I think really, if you ask me, one of the key drivers that is going to make sure that we have a sustainable prosumerism, we must really unlock and also support the millennial economy and the voices that are crowding in that area. I've been just thinking, and maybe in the video that I sent out, or that I sent to you, Joel, I did share with us of what I look at in the future of Africa, and a situation that I think if we don't harness that prosumer agency now, we might be looking at a problem in the future. And let me just shed a little context around that. The population of Africa by 2030, the statistics are out there and you know it, is going to be about 1.3 billion people. In 2052 to 2.5 billion people. These are people who are going to not only have the economic power, but are going to have the ability to have the purchasing power, because almost like half of them, as World Bank says, will be in cities with this purchasing power, which means there will be huge demand for commodity, for products and services. But how do we make sure that this same opportunity that is going to make Africa the single largest marketplace also not affect the conversations that we are having today, or the developments or the gains that we have had in maybe reducing the carbon footprints and things around this. So for us to be able to make sure that this opportunity does not turn into a challenge, we must make sure that we are able to also harness the power of different drivers, and that has been mentioned by the previous speakers, like technology, in trying to reduce the cost of production, enhancing, enhancing also the production patterns. Therefore, we must leverage on technology to cut the cost, but rather to also enhance the ecosystem drivers, because when a producer becomes a consumer, as we are going to see, because most of the times, Africa has been known as a major producer of raw materials, but now we are going to have, the single largest market, which means we are also going to have a very huge number of consumer base. So therefore, we must really enhance the drivers that are going to, to streamline the production patterns. And then the other thing that I actually been thinking about, I think all of us saw that Madagascar is the first country in the world to suffer from starvation as a result of climate change. And that simply also speaks to the point that I did mention about, that we have gotten to this point because of the various steps and actions that we have taken before. Because for a country as Madagascar to suffer as the first casualty of climate change, and might not be the last, we must rethink. And I think that's what Andrew also mentioned about when he was beginning, that we must influence the decisions that we make, not only as producers, but also as consumers, so that in as much as we consume more, we don't cause more damage to the planet. And lastly, all of the things that we have said will not anchor, and prosumerism will not continue or will not have any sustainable impact if it's not anchored in policy. And I look at policy in two ways. Number one is to keep in check and provide accountability for the actions that inform prosumerism in the continent. But number two, I also look at it as an opportunity to anchor activities of investment to promote this particular development. Therefore, it's very important for us as we continue in this conversation to look at very critically the possible areas of opportunity to enhance prosumerism. And if you ask me, I believe that the role of policy, and regulation is key in anchoring all the good conversations, all the best case scenarios or experiences, as Nikki had mentioned, that are able now to continually, strengthen this particular development. Therefore, I want to stop there, but I believe very, very strongly in one word that the opportunity area for us to drive this conversation going forward is not only in the evidence base that we're collecting, but making sure that we are able to anchor all of these in policy.
Very, very well said, Ronald. I think here, I'm beginning to think about who's responsible, whose responsibility is it to promote prosumerism, and is prosumerism necessarily a good thing? Should we, encourage this? Is it a way towards sustainability? And as we build onto this discussion, I wanted to invite Peninah Ndegwa, if you could also just share with us your reflections about what it means for you in terms of prosumerism and whether we have the agency to do that. Peninah, if you're here, please, you could start with introducing yourself.
Hi, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, allow me to be off camera because I'm in a public place. So yeah, to be honest, prosumer is a very new word to me. And I know when they reached out to me to speak about this, I had to Google it. What is prosumer, And how does it even relate to me as an urban and transport planner or as a climate of climate change? And just like in any other term, you always have to, think of how you can marinate your knowledge and experience with the changing dynamics of, how the world is going. And now for me, I thought of it in terms of populations, like where, sorry, if I may not speak it in the correct way, I have to say this, I don't feel really capacitated to speak on this topic, but I just speak from a point of view as a transport and urban planner. So for me, my point of view or point of convergence in this matter would be where are people living and how do they access goods and services? Yes, we agree urbanization, especially in Africa, is happening at a very fast rate. And with more and more people living in urban areas, where will they access, how and where will they access goods and services from? How will they be transported? How is the energy consumption, for example? How sustainable are their houses? How are they supporting, or how does development support or reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that the world is more sustainable? In that case, I would focus more on, let me just take a case example, maybe in transport. During COVID, we still are in the COVID-19 period era. Personally, I've never gone back to the office. I still work from home. And so that has reduced a lot of my fuel consumption. Like I don't have to travel to go to work. That means my energy consumption that was involved in the transport sector has definitely gone down. But either way, I still have to get to access goods and services. I still have to access food and all other materials that I may require for my survival. So how do we ensure that even now going back to when the world goes back to normal, how do we ensure that at least our mobility systems are more sustainable and require less of energy, or at least they emit less of greenhouse gases as compared to before? Thinking about energy again, with urbanization, we're having more and more people living in urban areas. Similarly, with climate change, we are having a lot of cold freeze. I think we have been complaining in Nairobi like really cold July than before. So you're tempted to have a heater on, something that you may never have required before. Does that mean that you're increasing your energy consumption? And what is the implication of that to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions? So for me, it's now thinking about how can we leverage on what we have, the systems that we have right now. How can we take advantage of the solar systems? If in the rural areas it's for energy cooking, instead of now focusing more on the green, on the wood for fuel, how can we now rethink cleaner fuels, maybe thinking about biogas, because I always think about my rural area, my village in Murang'a County. And yes, not everyone may afford the solar, but at least everyone has a cow. So instead of me thinking about how charcoal will be transported from wherever to get to my location, or at least even cut down some trees for fuel energy, and I have a cow that is there that could be used for, for energy generation through biogas, how can we start investing on ensuring that we finance such systems to be able to reduce the emissions? And also now, even in urban areas, thinking about how we can also take advantage of our sanitation, thinking about the innovations that could come up, for example, now coming up with briquettes and things just to, reduce the impact of climate change. I do not know that I'm speaking the right way, but those are my 2 cents. But basically for me, it's really thinking, connecting, where are the people living, where do they access services, and how do they access, and how can we make sure that at least that the link between the two is cleaner and greener. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Peninah, for your perspectives, and of course, looking at it from the transport sector, which is very important for the conversation, especially for the Rapid Transition Alliance, because this conversation on transition, how do we transition from what we are doing, and what are the cases, what are the examples where this transition actually gives us a leap into sustainable futures in some sense. So that's really, really interesting discussion. I just wanted to bring it back a bit to Nikki. When we started the conversation, when you gave your first thoughts, there was the whole idea of, responsibility. And I just want to ask, would you say that prosumerism is actually a good thing? Would it be a potential, and you're mentioning something in the comment, to actually enhance our agency?
Joel, may I comment on this matter, please?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Ali, go ahead.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much, Joel. I must appreciate the efforts by LCTS in terms of really creating awareness and or sharing knowledge in this area of sustainability. I think consumerism is a very important item which we cannot do without, but we need to regulate it in a manner that it will not be contributing to emissions, for example. But as an item, it is critical that this consumerism need to be guided by knowledge, and also it need to be guided by very strong policies that actually facilitates or guide how the products from consumerism need to be managed, because one of the difficulties associated with consumerism is production of waste, and as an African we have problem with waste management. So now adding the challenge of climate change to now huge mountains of waste that is found all over this country, for example Kenya or Africa, will really be adding more burden. So there is a need for technological innovations to come in so that some of these waste can be recycled, reused, re-engineered to produce new goods. Just the other day, for example, my son was telling me that all the gold that is being given at the Olympic from recycled gold from electronics. So look at that. These guys are making business. You know how much wealth Olympic is creating, but how much also they are also developing in terms of technological innovation. So in my opinion, public awareness on this matter is very critical. Technological innovation is very critical, and partnership actually, so that this partnership can lead to what you call green innovations and technology transfer from one region to another. Thank you so much, and God bless you. And University will remain a committed partner of African Center for Technological Studies. And I have got many friends there, including Joel. Karibuni sana, thank you.
Thanks, Ali, for those insights and bringing in different perspectives of this. Nikki, if you could start with the response.
Yes, you asked me about my comment about whether being a prosumer might make people feel as if they have more agency. And I just feel maybe it's because my own background also is in relatively small businesses, having worked in larger businesses and then founded my own companies with an attempt to follow my own ethics and do sustainable business. And I think when you are making decisions using resources and your own, including your own finances, and perhaps with the responsibility of employees as well, it does make those decisions different. It gives you some sort of extra additional agency. So I think there is something about the responsibility of business, and whether that's small or medium or large, I think that's something that is important, and it's building and growing around the world, but it's sometimes hard to distinguish between genuine sustainable business and a greenwashing or a public relations version of green business. But I think some of the things that Ronald spoke about is hoping that some of that innovation might come from younger people wanting to bring genuine sustainability into the business world, and therefore those kind of businesses, smaller, more flexible businesses, Agnes talked about the flexibility, is where those innovations can come into places to help solve problems. I suppose the difficulty is making those scalable and replicable. So rather than small things being just a nice example, that policymakers can, look to and make a big deal about, but actually, does it change policy? Does it make real changes on the ground? So I'm interested in how, I think Andrew said, how can the challenge is to make technology be a servant to answer our problems, rather than just to be a bright, shiny thing, which looks great and very exciting, but maybe can make us consume even more. Or for instance, as Ali was saying, to create more waste. That's the last thing that we need at the moment. Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think that's also a point of reflection in the sense that if you're looking at prosumerism, and I wanted to bring in Agnes here. Agnes, do you think prosumerism will be able to help us fit within existing systems? Do we really need to change a lot of things for us to fit into that system and encourage prosumerism? Because you ask questions like, do we have the right business models? Do we have the right regulation and policy? So would you say that prosumers will be able to fit within existing systems?
Yes, hi Joel. Yeah, so I think what is of essence is to first of all ask what are the systems in place, and I think in the chat there was an example that was cited by Andrew that we in many countries really, and Africa is not an exception as a continent, or African countries will not be an exception. We haven't reached a point where we can fully embrace prosumerism. So we, first of all, then we have to ask the question, for instance, if we are citing examples where we largely are consumers, what systems are we working on, or what systems do we have in place, and why is it that we haven't pushed ourselves to the production end? Because that is the scenario. And then we have to ask, what are the systems that would enable us to push ourselves to the production end? And then there comes to have the question, then the next question would be, then if we have systems in place that would allow production and consumerism, can we now start talking about prosumerism? So I think we have to still go back to the question, if we are ready, if we are feeling that we have systems or we are just consumers largely, are we already there at the point where we can say, okay, we are ready for the prosumerism question? And that actually got me thinking while you're asking the question that, is prosumerism a good thing? And then if it's a good thing, I mean, that's a question that we need to discuss. But then if it's a good thing, why are we not there, and what can we do to be there? And I started thinking about, you've mentioned quite a number of different groups. There are young people that Ronald talked about. There are innovators that we've also talked about. Then I start asking myself the question, and I quickly bring in the concept of incentives. That can incentives then be put in place for these different groups to start thinking of prosumerism, if we are arguing that it's a good thing? So, I mean, that's how I respond to your question on if we, regarding the systems, what we have to ask the question, what systems do we really have in place, even as consumers, and what is really making us to fall short of moving to the production angle and have them marry it together.
Yeah,
so I know I didn't really give you a
Joel,
response, but I
Joel,
asked
let
many
me
other
bring
questions.
a debate, an idea into this conversation. Joel, for example, Ummah University, which is an Islamic university, is partnering with the Catholic University, which is particularly the Tangaza College, which is a Catholic university, constituent college. And we have what is called Faith Cooperation for Social Transformation and the Interreligious Dialogue for Social Transformation. So these can, for example, under this dialogue, we can be able to push the agenda of how to manage consumerism, how to manage waste, and how we can, for example, have identify key universal human values, which we can use to rally the people so that they can avoid the wastage of resources in order to save the planet. So interreligious dialogue for social transformation and cooperation play a very important role in terms of responding to consumerism for enhanced sustainability in the 21st century. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ali, for that. I think there's already the question of partnerships and collaborations that results into prosumerism, positive prosumerism, if you could call it. So I think just in that point of reflection, I mean, I've been trying to think about how we can integrate, for example, prosumerism to circularity, which is also something emerging and taking up the space of reducing waste while sustainably growing, or going to the economic parts of growth in different spaces. And I see here a comment from Andrew Mutewa, talking about cultural systems and fitting prosumerism into cultural systems. Andrew Mutewa, I don't know if you want to share your view or your ideas around this space of prosumerism and how it engages with the context that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you, everyone. So this is really a very interesting topic, but I have to be quick to say that I'm not an expert in social sciences. I am a natural scientist, but I still visit the social sciences. Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to give my perception, my perspective on contextualizing prosumerism. The idea that I wanted to bring forward is that of the local context, making sure that this is working right from the local settings, because the majority of the people that for example, in Africa, in the rural areas, and we have to make sure that first of all, they need to understand what this means to them. Because most of the times they'll be looking forward to benefits that will be coming to them. If we take the approach that maybe we are proposing, or maybe through the government, or maybe non-government organizations are proposing for their own livelihood, they will still be happier to see if there's any direct or immediate benefit that they're going to get. So I think it would be quite an uphill at the moment, because we need to engage those communities first. So they'll be happy to see that if they do that, they have needs. They have needs to sell, needs to consume, and maybe largely consumers, the ones that are in majority. So we need to be in a position to show them that this is like a cycle, that the more you're consuming, you also have to be producing. So it might not be the same product line, or maybe the same supply chain. It could be one product, people are consuming more, and maybe another group of people are also producing another type of product that is also being used by yet another group. So I was bringing in the structures that already exist in most African communities, like maybe the villages. We have chiefs. They are very good when it comes to community engagement. So I have seen them working, for example, here in Malawi, when we were working with maybe malaria awareness, maybe a particular disease awareness, like the COVID-19, maybe introduction of prepared water meters in various rural communities. So these have been very, very helpful, engaging the community chiefs, and then the community chief will be in a position to mobilize his community. So the structures that already exist would be very handy and important to bring in these ideas, so that they should be embedded in the functionalities of the communities. Thank you.
Thanks for that very good example in terms of how the context actually could fit in different perspectives. I wanted to also ask Andrew Sims. There's this question about technology. You posted something on the chat already. Whether we're using technology towards getting us to solutions, or we're using technology to and it will increase the problems that you might face. What would be your take about this space of what I would probably call decolonizing technology for its use in a way that promotes prosumerism?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. And one of the reasons why I raise it is that we're having quite a big debate within the United Kingdom at the moment about products and the degree to which, when you are buying, for example, modern electronic goods, that you are able to repair them yourself. Obviously you can't, because they've got to the point in the way that they're designed, it makes it very difficult. So there's a process of alienation around consumption in economies like the United Kingdom, which I think we have to overcome. But at the same time, there is an interest, there's almost like a backlash at the moment, with people demanding the right to repair. And there is legislation which is kind of going through various legislations in the European Union to try and turn that back. And I see there's almost a kind of cultural self-medication going on with the rise in interest in so-called hacker spaces and repair spaces, the idea of share sheds where consumer durables that might previously have just been owned by every individual household are now shared within a community, and where they're maintained and repaired and kept. So the whole issue about an accessible technology, a repairable, a circular economy technology, which is the servant of our social and ecological needs, I think is rising up the agenda. And I suppose what I'm interested in very much with many of the people in the webinar today is that I have a sense, and it may not be a well-informed sense, I have a sense in which across the massive diversity of countries within Africa, that you might not have yet experienced the same separation from direct hands-on contact and control with the kinds of technologies that we use day to day. Of course, there are other big issues as well when one can turn around and look at what you might call as being the big distractions around whether it's geoengineering or space races, where you've got very shiny technology which gets a lot of media attention, but which is actually quite distant from being the servant of solving our critical well-being, livelihood, and environmental challenges. So it feels as if technology needs to be problematized. And again, I go back to what Nikki was saying before. I wonder if, with regard to having access and control over a technology that can help solve our own problems, that we have a lot to learn from people in the continent of Africa.
Yeah, thanks for that reflection, Andrew. I think it also speaks to, almost like Africa has a lot of potential to really, give. It's like a lot has not happened yet to make us seem like we are there to lose it all. We have a lot of potential agency to control where we go to in this space. So yeah, I think that's a really great point, and also learning from what has happened.
Joel, let me throw in a question. Maybe we can get some inputs. Can we have, or can the scholars comment now that we have got these global Chinese globalizing the world with their goods and services, which is actually expected to create what you can call sustainability crisis, because the Chinese goods and trades and services are already suffocating the technology in Africa and in other countries. And more is expected, where once this technology in Africa are suffocated, then all these goods that are being brought through the foreign trade or trade in Africa will going to produce so much waste, which are very complicated. So I really want to hear what policy responses could be proposed by the scholars in this context. Thank you.
A really interesting question about, type of technology and the kinds of technology, and whether we have systems that will be able to take up the circularity that could be required or could be necessary around this. I don't know if, Andrew, if you have a quick response to this.
Whether I have a quick response to the influence of China, well, that's difficult, obviously. Individually, I feel my agency is very small in regard to this, but I suppose I've just put a very small point into the chat, and that's to say that it seems as if one of the big problems in terms of the direction that we go in is, what is our role model? What are we allowing to guide us? Where do we think we're going? How are those role models set? And these are often set by whichever is the most confident culture. And I think one of the things which I've seen over many years is that it's very easy for people to feel their own agency and their own cultural identity to be undermined by some of the images that come through in a globalized media. Now, whether that might have been American style consumerism at one point, or whether it's now the projection of economic power from China. But I think, and this is me very much speaking from kind of an outside point of view as an observer, it seems to me that in terms of what we were just saying about technology, closeness to technology, closeness to production, that Africa still has a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills and a lot of ability that to be proud of, to hold up. And I think a little bit, I suppose, of the example that Gandhi made in India when he was facing down British colonialism and imperialism and trying to restore a sense of pride and ownership of the things which at certain levels in Indian society that they did very well. And I think there's this interesting moment within Africa at the moment where you have an opportunity to leapfrog the mistakes, many of the mistakes that we made, and also maybe hold on to many of the things that we lost. And that would seem to be a challenge, but it's very much also a cultural conversation about what you value and what is respected. And I think it's almost as if we need to restore respect for some of the technologies which are simpler and easier to control and which might facilitate prosumerism as we've been discussing it today, and so that we don't just kind of follow in the bright lights of whatever the most recent technology is, or even are blinded by the bright lights whoever is the biggest new geopolitical player on the block. So that would just be a kind of a quick thought in response.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the geopolitics around technology.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, the question about geopolitics and how it resonates with the potential to promote prosumers is actually a very important thing to also think about. Promoting production where you're relying on another source of technology is quite an issue. I wanted to just bring in Ronald a bit, and whether, Ronald, you have any comment on the question about technology and waste, and how that can, bridge the space on prosumerism. Do we have capacity to control this in any way?
Yes, I thank you for that question, and I think that the discussions herein are very interesting and very provocative. I think it's really a good direction that we're taking. But first and foremost, if you ask me, I think two things. Number one, I think I've mentioned, and I think Ali also agreed with me and most other speakers, that first and foremost, we must take awareness very, very important. We must teach our people, and we must use the best case examples that probably have been documented to, to try and develop the local ecosystem and even context for prosumerism. So I think really key is important in using those best case scenarios, but localizing them so that then the local masses, first of all, are very much empowered. Number two is, or rather a point tied to that before I come to number two, is once these masses are empowered, what we are promoting is simply consumer innovation, and consumer innovation is critical in supporting prosumerism. And the key question here will be, how do we make sure that this consumer innovativeness can be scaled up and its impact can be increased, so that then we might not have the complaints of people like China coming in, because at that level, again, we will have the regulations that have been set up to regulate some of these technologies or some of these things that are coming from the outside. And I also mentioned about generally regulations or policies is a double-edged sword. In as much as, yes, we are looking to ring-fence our geographic locations, and say Africa, and saying we want to promote consumer innovations in this space, and we want to tap into the innovations that are coming from our people themselves. But we must definitely look at how that also provides more and more opportunity for us to also harness other innovations and technology that will make sure that we not only produce and consume new goods, but we are responsibly taking care of our planet.
Thanks, Ronald, for that. I mean, it brings the question of doing more with less, basically. And I wanted to quickly invite Maureen Kabasa. You're talking about the environmental, the environment, the enabling environment around promoting, the whole idea of consumerism and the innovations around it. What's your thought on this? Because you're mentioning about how that can be used to enhance agency. Maureen Kabasa.
Thank you so much. Very interesting conversation that is going on here. And as I was going through the provocations that Andy and Ronald gave, my concern was one, on the impact of climate change. There's a tendency of not tendency. Sometimes you find ourselves having surplus. And this came from an example. There was a point in Kenya, there was too much milk, and there was a lot of losses in terms of some going to waste. And how can prosumerism come and contribute in terms of value addition? What are the enabling environments do we have in terms of value addition? How aware are people how aware are people on the issues of value addition and the capacities that they would have so that they can go through that? Yes, I'm trying to wrap my head around the issue of prosumerism. Because I was just I'm trying to understand it right now. But my issue was on a case where we have surplus. What are the enabling environment? Do we have the enabling environment? Do we have a balance between the consumer and the producer? Is there a balance where we can find in terms of having minimal or even no losses when we have surplus? So that is something that I was trying to deliberate myself.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Again, I think that's the fundamental bit of the agency discussion, what is where. And I wanted to bring in Cassandra Bunda. You've been mentioning about context. You also referred to technology earlier, and you're bringing in the aspect of local needs, contextualizing this. What is your take on the question that Maureen is raising, essentially talking about the enabling environment? How do we then ensure that we have outcomes that could lead us to a sustainable prosumerism?
Thank you so much, Joy, for the invitation. And it's really a great conversation that's going on. Yes, indeed, if you look at technology and the localization, because we're looking at customization of our customers with our local needs. Like I put in a chat, you find that one of the challenge that is impending customization in terms of the local products, it's impeded by the technological innovation, which are not reflecting the local needs, especially when you look at in the space of the climate change, where we see a lot of deployment and promotion of that technologies, particularly having a bottom-up approach where you just come up with the technology and then you dump it on the people. You will find that, especially for instance, when I will speak of maybe agricultural production systems and their technologies, find that a lot of technologies have been deployed, and much studies in Africa, for instance, I can put an example of Zambia. You find that some of the climate smart technologies that are being deployed are not really being adopted. You find that the adoption rate, the absorption rate of these technologies are very, very low, because you find that in terms of the way the technologies are designed are not reflecting with the cultural needs and the local needs of the people. And you find that in that regard, because of those low adoption of the technologies, we find that production really goes down. For instance, let me give an example of in agriculture. If you look at maybe the water harvesting systems, you find that most of the water harvesting systems technologies, you find that they are not compliant with, for instance, they are not gender transformative, or they are not gender responsive. And you find that majority, for instance, of the production in agriculture are women. And in Zambia, you find the majority of them are women. And you find that because of that kind of technologies that are not addressing the local needs, definitely you find that they're pushing away the adoption of these technologies. And you find that they result now in the normal and sustainable normal and sustainable kind of agricultural production, which is really causing a low production. So for me, my take on this one, I think we need a lot of supporting and promoting local innovations that are existence. And I know there are a lot of local innovation that are out there, but because we are being moved because of the systems and the policies that are there, we are being moved now to calling up deploying and adopting technologies that are being brought in, maybe through means of implementation, which is calling up a diverse of technologies that are being deployed, having a top-down kind of approach design, which is really not working for us. And maybe just quickly speaking on the issues of the technologies, especially we look at technology and globalization, we talked of an issue of China. I think we need systems within our local context that are able to regularize kind of technologies that are within the country. And I know in African countries, there are those institutions and systems that are there that are able to check, is this kind of technology really good for the people? Is this really good for our local countries? So those systems, if they exist, then there's need now to strengthen them. There's need now to strengthen them in a more that they are able now to deploy and call up a lot of innovation. And one aspect that was brought is to promote research in innovation that are locally context that are going to address a lot of local context, and that will be really be adopted, and that will be really maybe taken up. Thank you, Joy, for that. Thank you. That's my reflection.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. I mean, you brought in the question, one of the issues that we started this conversation with, and that was, from within our own systems, where are we? And you've given very good examples. And I think at this point, I just want to appreciate everybody for participating in this. I'd like to, at this space, invite Nikki Sontra to give us just some closing remarks. And in many ways, I appreciate everybody who's stayed, was joined, and who's started this conversation. As we continue, we're going to have another conversation in the next couple of weeks. And in that space, we will also be inviting you to participate in a topic about unnecessary travel, especially in light of COVID-19 and all that, and how that can actually, leapfrog, if I could use that word, as has been highlighted, into rapid transition. I'll invite Nikki. Nikki, if you...
Thank you very much. Yes, you've stolen most of my good stuff, Joel. I was going to talk about the next meeting. I've really enjoyed this discussion so far, and it feels to me like it's very much the start of a very interesting conversation that I hope we can continue and stay in touch with some of you. I've posted in the chat a link to how you become a member of the Alliance. It's free. Hopefully it's not too onerous. There's a short form to fill in. We'd love to have you as part of the group and to hear about your work and to help share your work, because this is very much about sharing learning. Rapid transition is rapid for a reason. We only have a very short time to make the changes towards a sustainable world, and we need everybody on board. For prosumerism, I think it could be very empowering as a concept. And thank you to Joel for putting together this and putting some sort of flesh onto that concept. It's been very interesting as a way of making the most of transition, particularly within the African context, and it may actually be very useful in other places too. But I can also see from what everybody has said, and thank you for really thoughtful and helpful inputs, that we still need such a lot of change to happen, a lot of systemic change, and also education people have mentioned, and awareness raising to enable this to happen. But I really want to thank you again, both the partners who've helped to organise this, to allow us a very valuable insight into some of your work. And yes, I feel I've just had a taster for today, so I'm raring to go for the next conversation now, Joel, and look forward to hearing from some of you then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks everyone for attending. I wanted to invite everybody to just share in the next 1 minute as we close this, just share their parting shots or their tweets out of this event. You can put it in the chat before you drop off. Otherwise, thank you so much. I want to appreciate the effort of Salome, who's been at the backdrop of putting all this together. Really appreciated your work here. For the panelists, Agnes, Lutomia, we had also Nikki Sonta, we had Ronald, and also had Peninah. Thank you very much for taking your time to be part of this discussion. We look forward to the next discussion, and so far so good. We've had a very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. Please post your parting shots or your tweets in the chat as you drop off. Thank you very much, and I wish everybody a great day and a great evening. And bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye, Joe.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye.